Good afternoon. It's Friday the 23rd of August 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Debi Evans and Mark Anderson. Now, we're going to get kicked off with online safety and censorship. And the great news that Ofcom has decided to begin its recruitment process once again. Now, of course, we all know that, don't we, that online misinformation fueled hateful riots across the country. Their words, not mine. So we all know as well that the Online Safety Bill became an act in October last year. In the run-up to that royal assent being given, Ofcom had hired 300 staff to deal with the online safety. They're now in the process of recruiting a further 100 staff. But as you can see on screen there at the moment, they are committed to protecting free speech without hate speech. So I don't know what we're all complaining about. Anyway, this is what they had to say. In recent years, we've grown our expertise in technology, data and cybersecurity. We've hired specialists from firms such as Meta, Google and Amazon, and experts from bodies like the NSPCC. So the companies that are going to be responsible for censoring us all under the auspices of the Online Safety Act are providing the staff to Ofcom for the process. This is, Debi, very, very briefly, this is very similar, it seems to me, to the MHRA.
I'm honestly, Mike, can we discuss this in extra? Because I've got quite a lot to say about this, seriously.
Absolutely. No, of course, anyway, the other sort of big agenda item that Ofcom is pushing at the moment is the Media Act. It was the Media Bill. It's now the Media Act. It has been since May. So this got passed just before the general election. So this, of course, is what they're describing as the biggest change to public service media framework in 2 decades. So this is all about not only protecting mainstream media and so on, but making sure that smaller providers aren't able to compete in any kind of way. So this is, again, what they said. The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport has laid the first commencement regulation before the UK Parliament, bringing certain provisions into force on Friday the 23rd of August. These regulations are used to bring specific parts of an Act of Parliament legally into force on a specific date. This first commencement order will allow us to continue our implementation plans. And this is what a couple of the items that they have on their list. They are preparing for their new duties for video on demand services, including reviewing their audience protection measures. So video on demand service would be the likes of YouTube or any other sort of video service like that. But if you remember back to 2013, 2014, Ofcom, through their subsidiary, the Authority for Television on Demand, was attempting to claim that smaller video producers were video on demand services. So we'll see how this pans out in the coming weeks and months. They say that they'll continue to develop the processes for designating the services which will be in scope for the new rules, as I've just mentioned, to ensure online PSB services are both available on popular TV platforms and capable of being easily found and discovered by audiences. So they want to make sure that the likes of BBC, iPlayer and so on, the content that's on there is not only easily available on the various big video on demand platforms, but that on search engines and so on, that content that's hosted perhaps on iPlayer itself is easy to find, because that is the most important thing, isn't it? But I wanted to highlight this article in Conservative Homes as well. This is from Miriam Cates, former Tory MP. She was until the general election. We should not defend extreme online discourse in the name of free speech, she argues. She does, however, make a couple of interesting points that I just want to highlight to see whether people want to think about them. She said, before the internet, anonymous communication was seen as cowardly and underhand. Poison pen letters and even the famous anonymous pamphlets of the 18th century were illegal. What we observe all too often in social media is a pre-civilizational and anarchic free-for-all where liars, psychopaths and common and garden dickheads, her words, operate freely and without penalty, and where individuals do not face the normal consequences of speech, offline at least, make it socially and financially costly to be insulting and predatory and antisocial. She says the best answer to online chaos is a deeply conservative one, the rediscovery of personal responsibility. The future of online freedom of speech depends not on an absence of regulation, but on our collective willingness to embrace the traditional values of kindness, honesty, and self-control in our new virtual public sphere. Well, the question is, in the general context of the article as a whole, is she arguing that people need to be brought out of their shells? They may want to bring in some kind of legislation which enforces the requirement to provide your identity online. And of course, as we were mentioning on Wednesday's program, this is something that Ofcom is already recruiting for with respect to identity checks and age verification and so on. But where does this take us? Because she's suggesting that people that are out in the open are somehow in a better position, or it's a better place to be. Well, is it? Because look at this article from the BBC. Conspiracy theorist granddad jailed over disorder. This is absolutely incredible. It's quite incredible also that the journalist is apparently called Ollie Constable, because they're talking about abuse against the police. But anyway, this person, we'll just look at a couple of the comments that they make in this article. A conspiracy theorist who abused police when an anti-immigration protest turned violent has been jailed. Now, you might ask, how did he abuse the police? Was he violent himself? Well, no. He said that police officers, MPs and the media were corrupt. He was holding a sign up and he was shouting at the police. So this is Peter Lynch. He's 61 years old and he's now been sentenced to 2.5 years, 2 years and 8 months, and is heading off to prison. He shouted allegedly racist and provocative remarks towards officers and called asylum seekers child killers. This might be, quite strong speech, but it is only speech. He wasn't throwing rocks. At least there's no evidence to suggest that he was. That's certainly not what he's been convicted of here. He was filmed calling the police scum. Really, sticks and stones will break my bones comes to mind here. Are we really now going to put people in prison for 2 years, 8 months for yelling the word scum at the police? This is getting beyond a joke. He was described as being a full participant in the disorder. You were unquestionably endeavouring to rev up the situation the best you could, said the judge, Judge Richardson. And the placard stated that police chiefs, reporters, civil servants, judges and the environment agencies were all corrupt. I mean, this is quite incredible. And then I just want to highlight somebody else who's been arrested here, and that is Sam Nass, who has featured on the UK column a couple of times in interviews with Brian. So she was trafficked into this country and then had her children taken by the state. Arrested yesterday, apparently bailed. We'll find out more in due course about what's actually happened here, but she was simply quietly protesting over the removal of her children outside the Cabinet Office. And finally, I'll just coming back to the so-called race riots and the imprisonment of magistrates are apparently being told to stop jailing offenders to ease the prison crisis. This isn't actually quite true. The headlines are misleading. At least what they've been asked is to delay the sentencing. If somebody is safe to be bailed, then to delay the sentencing to later in September until they've had a chance to release a whole bunch of prisoners from the UK prisons to make room for the new people going in. This is a very dangerous situation and quite incredible. But Debi, let's come on to you then and bring us up to date on the latest on the NHS.
Well, interestingly, actually, I'm going to be talking about the NHS. Good afternoon, everyone. And you've just been talking about the criminal justice system, and that's going to be a nice little tandem in a minute. But I want to talk really about that the UK is a very sick nation. And I hope that this segment will not only be a reminder for our audience, but also for anybody new that's tuning into UK Column that isn't quite aware of the chaos and disruption that's going on within the NHS. Where are we now in the NHS, I think, is what I'm going to be showing you, because there is no opt-out from the NHS. There's no sludge to get you out of the NHS. Once you're in it, you're in it. And I want to remind people of what Keir Starmer said only 30 years ago, a young Keir Starmer, 1994. Have a listen.
I do think it's time that the court system became much more of a place where the ordinary person feels they can go, and I think that means stripping judges and lawyers of their wigs and gowns and making it much more like a GP's health centre.
So we're going to be stripping judges and lawyers of their gowns, and we're going to be making courts more like GP centres. And we have to ask the question, what are GP centres like now? And how much decision making does your GP have on life-changing and life-altering and sometimes life-ending decisions? So let's look at Labour. They're fit for the future, which what does that actually mean? They're building an NHS fit for the future. To me, that means they're launching a wrecking ball at it. But what did Wes Streeting say? Even Wes Streeting has admitted that the NHS is indeed broken. But let's look at the reality of what's happening in the NHS, because at the moment, skin cancer patients, they're facing delays of over a year. 38,392 new patients between 23 and 24. I wonder why. Unless we eliminate the injections, we're never going to know full cause, are we, is my question. Also, nationally, sick leave has gone up by 50% in the UK since 2019. Again, I would put the question mark, why? I think many of us know why. Going on to personal independence payments, which are indicative of a very sick nation, putting pressure on an already overwhelmed NHS. We're seeing claims skyrocket. March 2020, 2,455,177 people claims, and in April 2023, claims of 3,544,042. And many of you will remember the Ed Dowd interview that we did, where he said, actually, if disability payments go up anymore, it's going to potentially bankrupt the country. And mental health issues, again, are figuring high on that. So let's look at the new Rethink Mental Illness. They say a third of people's mental health worsened while they were waiting for treatment. And surgical patients are saying that too, that their conditions are worsening whilst they're waiting for treatment. A third of people are going private mental health. And the Children's Society are reporting a shocking rise, 50% in the last 3 years. Again, we have to say why, and lockups perhaps are largely to blame. But with 5 children in a class of 30 with likely mental health issues, we've got to ask why. Cancer, 1 in 2 will develop some form of cancer in their life. Well, that message popped up around 2014 out of absolutely nowhere. Then we look at cancer screening. That's going on in the NHS at the moment. So again, we're screening healthy people. Just remember this. We've got a lot of sick people. Now we're screening healthy people. Cervical cancer, breast and bowel. But what other tests are we offering at the moment and inviting people to come for? So I just did a little kind of notice board of a few of them. So we've got the shingles vaccine for healthy asymptomatic people. We've got have a prostate PSA test or a dementia check, or maybe you want to be genomic sequenced or genomic tested, a flu jab, vaccinations for pregnancy, COVID jabs, bowel cancer, you name it. You're being invited for it. And I want to talk very quickly about something that WHO has said, which is chemoprophylaxis and vaccination. So basically, they're going to be looking to medicate people before they get sick. So this is about prevention. But we'll come on and talk about a bit more about that in a minute. But is there any wonder why healthy people now are feeling ill? Because they're being made to feel ill. They're being looked at, they're being tested. And I just want to give you a little description really of what's called the worried well. So these are patients who are perceived as using the health services inappropriately or disproportionately when other more deserving patients should be given attention. Or if we jump to Collins, who also describe it as patients that need to take medication when they don't need to, which is exactly what the government and the big pharma are asking you to do, because that's the intention. Preventative medicine, chemoprophylaxis, taking medicine before you're sick. And doctors may refer to patients as the heart sink patients. Their hearts sink when a patient walks through the door, because we're making healthy people think that they're sick. So illness, anxiety disorder, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So walking hypochondriacs, basically, when someone without medical symptoms is preoccupied with worrying about developing an illness, well, Isn't that exactly what they're trying to do? Make people check their apps, how many steps they've walked, how many calories they've eaten, their blood pressure. They have to check a black screen the whole time. And we mustn't forget in this country, because in Canada, there's been the MAID system, the medically assisted dying program. And in this country, we have the same. And I just want to highlight you to a BMA survey on physician assisted dying. When you go to look at it and what doctors actually think, worryingly, 50% on the next slide, it'll show you that 50% believe that the law should change in favour of assisted dying, whereas only 39% are against it and 11% are undecided. And when you go and look at what the public think, and I went to an article in the Telegraph, and I found this quite striking, that the public fear that GPs would pressurise them to take their own lives, and that doctors would encourage assisted dying to ease pressure on the NHS. And 43% of the public thought that doctors would be incentivised to end people's lives, whereas 37% didn't. But the article went on to say that even though people have feared that assisted death could be normalised, that despite that, 60% of 2,000 surveyed actually supported it, which is quite a worrying statistic. And I certainly wasn't one of the 2,000 were surveyed, were you? More collapses of the infrastructure in the NHS at the moment. And this is the reality of the NHS at the moment. So we've got pharmacies closing. We've been talking about this for quite a while. Lots of them closing. In the next slide, it says that so far in 2024, 200 have closed in England only, which will leave only 10,000 pharmacies in England open by October, which is one of the lowest levels. And I don't know if anybody else is noticing, but I'm noticing these zero tolerance notices everywhere, where you have to be kind to the staff, you have to be kind to your doctor, you have to be kind to companies. But it doesn't seem as though anybody's listening to the public or being kind to us, and we're being used as a scapegoat to put the blame on. But GP surgeries, so they're hanging on a cliff edge as well. And I went to look at a quarter of the GP practices could close because of workload pressures. And are they fit for the future? Well, when we go to look at the GP's action, because we know that GPs are going to be taking industrial action, I was very interested, and I've highlighted just a couple of bits because they're taking industrial action for many reasons. But some of the reasons you may not know are that they're going to refuse to share data. And they're going to refer people directly to a specialist, and that seems like a jolly good idea to me. And they're also going to switch off NHS software. So this is all part of their industrial action. So perhaps we should be reconsidering what the GPs are doing. But then, of course, what else are we looking at in the NHS? Well, any excuse to close the hospitals. So we've got crumbling hospitals, and we've also got hospitals full of sewage, of course. But this is the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete drama that's been going on. We've got 7 hospitals at risk at the moment. And despite Boris Johnson promising to build new hospitals, it seems that our new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has got very different ideas, and she's casting doubt on a hospital building programme going ahead at all. But don't worry, because as we've reported loads of times before, community diagnostic centres, that's going to be the thing of the future. You're not going to be going to hospital, you're not going to be seeing a doctor, and I'll be talking about that later in the news. And it's all about how the NHS minimise risk, and we'll go on to talk about that later on in the news. But where are we looking at? Well, if you're not going to hospital, where are you going? Well, your own bed, of course. Virtual wards where extra NHS beds are actually yours. And we're going to be looking at frailty virtual wards. Now, the clinical frailty scores, they come from all sorts of different sources, but we'll talk about that too. And how are we going to do it? We're going to do it with medical devices. We're going to prevent, monitor and treat people. We're going to use implants and apps. And the NHS app, is that going to be good enough? No, it's not. And I'll tell you more about that later.
Okay, Debbie, thank you very much for that. And Mark, related, I suppose, what is the latest on the various pandemic claims and treaties and so on?
The latest, Mike, is that there's 2 scenarios now. Note the timing. At least in the United States, the school year is about to start. In places like Texas, it's on the brink of starting. In northern states, it starts right after Labor Day, the first Monday in September. And this first slide is an article by Alex Newman, an acquaintance of mine at two different Red Pill Expos, one in 2016, one in 2022, from Exposing the Darkness column. Democrats and globalists urgently prepare to reimpose COVID-style policies on schools. He's saying government schools across the U.S. must urgently prepare to reimpose COVID-style policies on students and staff in response to an expected upcoming pandemic, warned a former high-ranking public health bureaucrat in the Obama administration. Among the key measures, a push for mass vaccination, writing in an article published last month in the left-wing outlet Stat News, the far-left former pandemic official offers wide-ranging advice to school district officials on how to prepare for COVID 2.0, in this case, likely the bird flu or H5N1 avian influenza. But there's a different twist to it. There's two scenarios, actually. We'll move on. And this is a reference by Alex Newman to Dr. Mario Ramirez, former acting director of the Office of Pandemic and Emergency Threats within the DHHS. And he's the one warning about H5N1 and that it could jump to humans in the near future. As such, schools must prepare to deal with it. The warnings come as a front group for Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the World Economic Forum, known as the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, just issued similar warnings, which is very interesting. We can move on from there. This is the person, I won't get into it a lot. This is Dr. Mario Ramirez that Alex Newman is referring to. People can check out a little bit about his CV on this slide if they want to freeze that later. And we'll continue. These are some miscellaneous headlines where the WHO, however, is not touting the bird flu. They're saying the big thing to look out for is monkeypox, or Mpox for short. And this is just a miscellaneous collage of headlines. Quite recently, as you can see, 14 August 2024, WHO Director General declares Mpox outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. That's the big threshold they need to declare a pandemic. So they've already made that threshold, although it may be in its earlier stages. And then 19 of August, there's another headline. First meeting of the IHR, the International Health Regulations Emergency Committee, regarding the upsurge of Mpox 2024, and a couple other recent headlines that get into this. And the WHO, as we continue, also goes on to say that the influenza from the bird flu, H5N1, is at a low ebb. So they're really saying monkeypox is the big thing. Whereas Alex Newman is hearing it's more like the avian bird flu. So which is it? And this is just a basic statement from the WHO, and people can check out the details. And here's a little bit more from Alex Newman. Apparently, Americans are currently enjoying the bliss of the interpandemic period. Enjoy it while you can, folks. COVID 2.0 will come upon us like a storm, he claims. We just don't know when, where, or how it will arrive. Of course, he's a constitutional writer for the New American Magazine and an oftentimes Red Pill Expo speaker. I believe we have another one. But if we're to believe Dr. Ramirez, it's unavoidable, and only a massive vaccine campaign, including mRNA shots for children, can save the children. And in this same column, I'll mention that Alex Newman goes on to say that he believes more and more people need to homeschool right away, even now with the public school schedule about to begin. However, we hear about Mpox being the main culprit, according to the WHO. Alex Newman is hearing it's more about the bird flu, and yet there's an international bird flu summit coming up. And here's a screenshot from that. It shows some fairly self-evident things there. Bird, cattle, pets, people, there's various things. And this is from a brochure, as I indicate here, an event brochure, and the bird flu summit will take place in early October. This is some of the things I pulled from the brochure in this next slide. And the very things that I pulled out were really the most significant. The top one topics include mass fatality management planning. Well, I highlighted that. Notice what it says here: develop and maintain plans, procedures, programs, and systems But the bottom one, it says conduct morgue operations. A little bit more of a kind of creepy thing there. And another thing I pulled from it that's very interesting is continuity of government operations. And we've seen this, especially in the US, when they outline scary scenarios. They talk about continuity of government. How will government continue if there's a massive public nuclear attack or health emergency or things like that? How will government continue to operate? So a little ominous there, even though the WHO is denying the significance of the avian bird flu. And this last slide on this topic, it's just another twist on it. A World Health Organization official on Tuesday emphasized that Mpox, whether the old or new strain, is not comparable to COVID-19 because its spread is more controllable. Authorities know the measures necessary to contain its transmission. And yet this source here, Hans Klug, a WHO regional director for Europe, added the following. So we will choose to put the systems in place to control and eliminate Mpox globally? Question. Or will we enter into another cycle of panic and neglect? How we respond now and in the years to come will prove a critical test for Europe and the world. So it's a little bit ambiguous, but it's sort of a two-tiered, two-scenario thing, and the timing is very important. And so this is a renewed reason under the new pandemic treaty and the new IHR to be very vigilant at this time. So back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, I don't know whether it's ambiguous. I think certain elements are desperate to bring this type of regime back into place, but generally there isn't support for it. So, anyway, we can talk a bit more about that in extra. Now, if you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. Your support is very much needed and would be greatly appreciated. You could, however, if at the very least, share our material on the various platforms. ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk is a place to go for that. And of course, censorship continues, as we've mentioned. If you would like to pick something up at the UK Column shop, there's quite a few items there for you to grab hold of, especially Your Life in Their Hands. We want to see this distributed as widely as possible. So please do pick up a couple of copies if you can and send them around your friends and so on. A reminder of the event on the 19th of October 2024. The venue will be in Bristol. Anybody that's bought tickets, we will be contacting with venue details very, very shortly. But tickets available on the UK Column shop as well. The interview that Charles did with Kevin Lister is up on the UK Column website now. So that went out yesterday. And this was a teacher having basically his career decimated as a result of him challenging transgender ideologies. On Sunday, the 8th of September at 6 p.m., we will be hosting a symposium run by International Centre for 9/11 Justice on aviation impossibilities, deconstructing the official story of the 9/11 hijackings and air defence failures. That will be on the UK Column website, on the community website, and various other places as well. A final reminder that the Hope Sussex Freedom Music Festival starts today and over the weekend. So hopefully as many people as possible are going to that. I'm sure if you can go at the last minute, please do. And also a reminder that Brian and I will be speaking at the Heritage Party Conference on Saturday, the 28th of September 2024. Tickets are available at the Heritage Party website, and you'll get more details there as well. And finally, another reminder of the Died Suddenly exhibition taking place in November. Details from Jake Fern, his email address on screen at the moment. Now, let's come on to the issue of war. And of course, Ben Walsh used to be our Secretary of State for War, and he's been making an appearance in the media quite a bit over the last few days. So this is from the 11th of July. Europe can do more to help Ukraine, says former Defence Secretary. And then we've got one here from the 20th of August. Former Conservative Defence Secretary calls for Ukraine to be allowed to unleash Western-supplied rockets inside Russia. And then we have this, Britain must give Ukraine everything it needs to finish the job against Russia, says ex-defence chief. That was from yesterday. So let's have a look at, he was on the BBC Radio 4 today, PM program, last night. And he was very much complaining that Germany isn't pulling its fair share here. He said Britain, Italy and France have supplied significant supplies of storm shadows. That is not an endless supply. So there's an acknowledgement there that they are using more than perhaps we can supply. Germany has Taurus, which is exactly the same type of missile. Chancellor Scholz has continually refused to release them. The best boost you could give Ukraine for fighting within Ukraine is if Germany joins France and Italy and Britain to release those stocks and gives Ukraine a proper stock of those missiles to deal with Russians in Ukraine. So Ben Wallace was absolutely banging the war drums the entire time he was Secretary of State for War, and continues to do so now that he is retired from the role. And certainly the mainstream press absolutely keen to give him the coverage that he needs. But what other kinds of coverage is the mainstream press giving? Well, here's the Times, and their headline here is Ukraine is invading with British tanks. What does it mean for us? And this is really an article which is promoting the idea that we should be playing chicken over the potential of use of nuclear weapons. So this is what they have to say. British officials and experts think your European allies are too concerned about provoking Russian escalation. Despite increases in the military kit supplied to Ukraine, security officials say there'd been no sign of Russia even threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons, the nightmare scenario which would make the Third World War threats credible. This is an incredible point of view that's being presented here. Keep pushing because Russia is not going to do it, and they're absolutely taking this risk. And they cite an unnamed defense source, as these articles like to do, saying that the Russians always spit fire and brimstone. I can promise you they haven't moved a muscle in the direction of nuclear war since the war began. We look at this all the time because tactical nuclear use involves lots of stages, lots of people are involved, lots of movement of missiles. This is quite incredible. Keep pushing the pressure, keep using Western weapons. Maybe we're arguing now that Western personnel should get involved because we don't need to worry. The Russians are not going to use their tactical nuclear weapons. And they quote General Petraeus from the former CIA director speaking in 2022, saying that we would respond to a Russian use of nuclear weapons by leading a NATO collective effort that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine and also in Crimea, and every ship in the Black Sea. And this is pretty ironic because, this is basically what we're asking Ukraine to do already, and they're failing miserably to do it. We do not have this capability. And for the Times to be presenting this quote as being something possible is just laughable. In the meantime, the Russians themselves are pushing back a little bit on Britain and British think tanks in particular. So this was a statement from a couple of days ago from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about this Foreign Ministry statement on imposing personal sanctions against representatives of UK think tanks. This is what they had to say. The UK government persists in its aggressive anti-Russia policy. As part of this vision, London pursues the goal of achieving what it calls a strategic defeat on the battlefield against our country, even if those efforts were always doomed to failure. In doing so, it's been making active use of a mechanism which consists of imposing illegitimate restrictions through sanctions, as well as waging an informational and media campaign rooted in lies and hypocrisy. All this attests to the commitment by the UK's political establishment, imbued as it is with anti-Russia sentiment, to carry on with its tough and system-wide confrontation with Russia. I can't disagree with anything that's said there, because we've been talking about Britain's position on Russia for many, many years, particularly around 2017, 2018, when we were talking about the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft. So it's perhaps unsurprising that the Institute for Statecraft appears on the list of think tanks that Russia is sanctioning. They're sanctioning personnel that belong to these think tanks. So we've got the Forward Strategy Limited, we've got the Institute for Statecraft. Now, that's quite surprising because, quite honestly, I thought it was gone. Their website's certainly gone, but apparently it's not quite fully away yet. Media Diversity Institute, a few others there. Chatham House, of course, mentioned Privacy International, Peace Child International, Aga Khan Foundation, and so on. But if we consider the Institute for Statecraft, and we think about this because, of course, it was funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office at the time, and it was running this integrity initiative mechanism where basically journalists and others and think tanks were pushing out anti-Russia propaganda in 2017 and 2018 until it was highlighted how much of a scam it was. Now, I wrote this article, Integrity Initiative, a look into the deep state, in December 2018. And I just wanted to highlight some of the text on this because one of the people that was sanctioned was Daniel Lafayette. And he's mentioned in this article because he and Chris Donnelly set up the Institute for Statecraft, both from they met at Sandhurst, but I was highlighting here that they'd attended the Herzliya Conference, the so-called Bilderberg of the Levant. This is the Israeli establishment and military-industrial complex meeting for the discussion of Israeli national policy. So on the attendees list was Chris Donnelly and also Daniel Lafayette. And what I'm saying here is that while Donnelly referred himself at that time as being a senior fellow at the Defence Academy, Lafayette, even though he was also a senior fellow at the Defence Academy, decided to identify himself as representing BICOM, which is the British Israel Communications Research Centre. And that's a pro-Israeli advocacy organisation with very close links to the Conservative Party in the UK via Poju Sablutovitz, which is BICOM's founder and former chairman, who personally funded David Cameron's Tory leadership campaign, as well as former BICOM board member Trevor Pears, who also made donations to David Cameron and Tory constituency offices in the run-up to the 2010 election. And if we're talking about election interference, as I say there, we note the lack of Russian election interference at that time. And then moving on then to Africa, because the issue of Africa continues to rumble on, because we are very interested in the Sahel in particular, which is somewhere that Russia and China have increasing influence. And I just want to go back to a couple of years ago when Jens Stoltenberg was saying this. He was talking about the expansion of NATO into the Pacific area, and he's saying this is not about moving NATO into the South China Sea, but it is about taking into account that China is coming closer to us in the Arctic, in Africa, investing heavily in infrastructure. How dare they invest heavily in infrastructure? So that was what he was saying at the time. And I just want to make the point that the EU, both the EU and the UK Foreign Office, are very interested in the Sahel region. So this is the European Union External Action. This is basically their Foreign Office talking about the Sahel. This is the UK Sahel Region Development Partnership summary. And of course, the quantity of conflict stability and security fund money that goes into this area, making sure that the conflict there continues. Well, certain countries in Sahel have got together and published an open letter. This is Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. They're asking the United Nations Security Council to address the fact that Ukraine is actively supporting insurgencies in the Sahel region. And of course, Ukraine is a proxy of Britain, the EU, the United States, and so on. And they're saying that they oppose and strongly condemn the open and acknowledged support of the government of the Republic of Ukraine for international terrorism, which cannot be justified, stressing that the acts officially claimed by Ukraine, an aggressor state, constitute a direct threat to international peace and security, particularly in the Sahel region and in Africa. So this is quite incredible. Even at least one mainstream media outlet has recognized this, and that is Al Jazeera, saying Ukraine is losing the plot in Africa. Of course, Ukraine is getting involved in funding and dealing with insurgencies in the Sahel because Russia is active there, and they perceive this as being a front in the war. This is an expansion of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict into Africa, as we've been suggesting was going to happen for quite some time. So keep an eye on this. It's going to get even more interesting, I think, in the coming days, weeks, and months. Let's come back to you, Debi, and what's happening for the NHS in the future then?
Well, yes, thank you. I hope the first segment gave you an idea of what the NHS, well, it's in complete and utter chaos at the moment. So what are we going to do to make it better? And are we patients or are we risks? So Tony Blair has got great visions for artificial intelligence. So the NHS is going to be controlled by artificial intelligence. Let's hear what he has to say about how governments should deal with AI.
I am constantly saying to my own party, Labour Party, which will probably win this election, you've got to focus on this technology revolution. Yeah. It's not an afterthought. It's the single biggest thing that's happening in the world today that is going to change everything. Leave aside all the geopolitics and the conflicts and war and America, China, all the rest of it. This revolution is going to change everything about our society, our economy, the way we live, the way we interact with each other. And if you don't get across it, then when there is a crisis, you're going to find you've got no idea how to deal with it. I think we're living through a period of massive change, right? This is the biggest technological change since the Industrial Revolution, for sure. How do you use it to transform healthcare, education, the way government functions? I mean, this is a huge agenda for a government and a really exciting one. You know, people get a bit depressed about being in politics because you get all this criticism. People certainly in the West feel society's not changing fast enough and well enough. And I say, no, it's a really exciting time to be in politics because you've got this massive revolution that you've got to come to terms with.
And this massive revolution is taking place in the NHS. So Digital Health published that the Blair Institute was calling for a crash programme for every citizen to have a digital health record. Now, we have to combine this with the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Medical Things, and we can see where that this is heading. But further on in the article, it does say that the aim is for all British citizens to have a digital health record within 5 years. And this is going to be moving into prevention and to preparing the NHS for an AI future. They also say that the government should commit to this within one term of Parliament. So this is going to be, when it actually does come up for debate, it's going to be pushed through and rushed through pretty quickly. Politico report that Blair dreams of AI chatbots and fewer GPs. And he's really not joking, because this week, the Blair Institute published a new paper called Preparing the NHS for the AI Era, a digital health record for every citizen. And note that the UK has a new government, which of course has a strong mandate. Of course, it's his government. And he wants to reform the NHS, I'd call it, throwing a wrecking ball at it personally. But looking at the shifts, we're looking to go from treatment to prevention, hospitals to primary and community care, and analog into digital innovation. So what does this actually mean for each and every one of us? Well, they say that the digital health record is going to become the single source of truth. Now, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. You're going to get 111 access through your digital health record. I'll call it DHR for short. Patients with long-term conditions will be reliant on apps and digital medicine and digital health. And again, they talk about prevention. But even more worryingly, artificial intelligence will drive clinical decision-making for patients and clinicians in the UK using algorithms. Now, I don't know if you trust an algorithm or AI to make a clinical decision on you, but I'm not sure that I would. And let's remember Wes Streeting, who appointed Lord Darcy to do an investigation into the state of the NHS and to look at digital health records. Just want you to look at the diagram there, because you see provider, which is the NHS, you see patient, which is you, but then you have the third one, insurer. So let's go to look at insurer portals, because this is what the paper is showing. And it's going to give insurance companies the ability to understand the risk of each and every one of us, which is why I'm saying we're no longer patients, we're risks. So they say that the NHS should be thought of really as an insurer, but because it hasn't got the data to perform or understand a risk profile of its population, we're going to give this service to insurance companies to enable personalised treatment for each patient based on individual characteristics of risks and ill health. So if you're high risk, or if you have got severe health, then I can imagine your risk will be very high. If we look at the patient portal, this is the right to download records. Now, they'll be using a health wallet, and you'll get chat boxes and you'll get apps. And they mention Apollo there. And we did mention Apollo. We have talked about Apollo on a number of programs before. And I just want to highlight, if you want to see where India are involved and how India are collaborating with the NHS, 12th of January 2024 and 2nd of February 2024, we were talking much more about it. And if we turn our attention to Israel as well, because we've done a lot of work with the Israel UK Health Roadmap, we can see that we are now collaborating with Israel to study how we can offer our citizens a basket of goods like Israel does. So we're looking at competitions, and we're looking at 2-tier, possibly 3-tier NHS, or 3-tier health system, should I say. And of course, Blair believes that the Secretary of State should be in charge of all of this, of course. And he sets it out here saying that the Health Secretary should be the joint data controller. Here we go with that word again, controller. And they should have links with GPs, which essentially we've all got GP records. So that's a direct link. They also say that there should be public engagement, and we should deliberate about it to maintain and build public trust. I would suggest that actually, if something of this high magnitude, we should perhaps have a referendum. But how do they think they're going to do this, build the NHS into the AI of the future? So they're going to look at 4 options. The first 2 here, build from scratch, that's self-explanatory, or they're going to build from an existing secondary care infrastructure, such as the Federated Data Platform, the NHS Federated Data Platform. We've spoken a lot about that too. It's controversial. Or they're going to build out an existing primary care infrastructure, because we've all got GP records of some form, because we all have, right? Even if we've opted out and we've deregistered with our GP. And the third and fourth are to build out from an existing primary care infrastructure, because of course, again, you've got GP records, so that's easy, or scale an existing digital health record on something they've already got. But what practical steps actually should the government take? Well, they should say that they want to establish this digital health record for all citizens, which makes the NHS into a 2, possibly stroke 3-tier system, or a 3-tier health system, by using private companies and third sector organisations, which could be charities. They're going to be using wearables, and essentially the NHS is going to exist on a cloud. That's where it's going to be. So going back to shift 1 and shift 2, this is what Blair is envisaging. Shift 1, we're going from treatment to prevention. So we're all going to have a digital health assistant, all going to use AI, and they're going to use large language models like ChatGPT-5, which is due to come out, and Claude 4, which is due to come out at the end of the year. And then again, your hospital bed is going to now become your bed at home. And very briefly, the conclusions, well, it's basically, it's AI or you lose the NHS. And that's very clear what they've said there. We're going from reactive sickness to proactive health. We're going digital health record, they're saying, is the obvious solution. And just note the words there: lockstep, privacy, security, patient choice, urgent, and priority. And who put this document together? Well, it was John Hopkins. I'll just mention a few of the names that you're bound to know: the NHS Confederation, Boots, Imperial, NHS England, Amazon, Royal Mail, Tesco, AXA Insurance, Cambridge University, Oxford. And maybe in extra, I can introduce you to the AI doctor, Eureka, or I don't know if you want to do it now, Mike, but it's not just health that Tony Blair has got his fingers in every pot, because he's looking to do it with DWP as well. Let's make the whole of DWP artificial intelligence. So that's the way of the future.
Yeah, so we'll just put that on screen so that everybody sees that from the big issue. Tony Blair thinks DWP should be automated by AI. That's quite incredible, the direction of travel at the moment. We will look at that little video clip in extra. Now, let's just move on then, just very briefly to mention again the energy price rise, which we mentioned on Wednesday, because at that point it was only a forecast. Cornwall Insight had pushed this out on the 19th. They were suggesting a 9% increase compared to the July price cap. And if you remember, I said at the time that the 27th of August was when we were going to find out. Well, in fact, if we look at the text on that, it says the levels for the next period will be announced by the 27th of August. So apparently they've been announced today. And this is what they're saying: between the 1st of October and the 31st of December, the energy price cap is set at £1,717 per year for a typical household. That's an increase of 10%. So the forecast wasn't too far away, but that's a 10% increase. Now, that's pretty horrendous for a lot of people. Just keep in mind that's about half of what it was at the same period in 2022, but nonetheless, it's still way beyond what it should be, particularly because in the meantime, we're being promised all kinds of falling energy prices as a result of the increasing number of windmills and other things that have been installed. And of course, this is complete nonsense. We know that windmills and so on are going to cause prices to rise even further. So we'll see what happens in January, but many expecting the price to go up even further at the coldest part of the year. Mark, let's come back to you then. And well, in the United States, you have a general election in full swing, and it's not too far now to the vote itself. And the Democratic National Convention has been going on, and that must have been very exciting for lots of people.
A little tortuous to watch, I might add. It wasn't voluntary, had to do it for news purposes. The Democratic National Convention started this past Monday and concluded last night. So this is very timely information, although in this first slide, we're remembering that Kamala Harris, who for quite a while was the Attorney General of California, went right up to the U.S. Senate, rather meteoric, you might say, much in the way that J.D. Vance, his very first public office is the U.S. Senate on the other side of the aisle. Very, very, very dramatic increases in terms of career. But here, 5 years ago, Kamala Harris, already a senator, only in the one and only term that she served in the upper chamber, she's already scratched and trying to be president even before she was vice president. So she ended her bid 5 years ago in the 2020 election in late 2019. Here's how California factored in her rise and fall. And so things were not so glitzy and glamorous back then. U.S. Senator Kamala Harris, California's highest profile presidential candidate in decades out of California, dropped out of the Democratic primary race on Tuesday. This is late December 2019, following reports of divisions within her campaign, months of plummeting poll numbers, and struggles to raise the necessary money to compete with the top tier of candidates. So things were very dramatically different not so long ago. And I'll just mention that the emphasis on polls, not only are the pollsters who are citing her keeping right up with Trump and sometimes beating Trump in certain states, not only are their backgrounds questionable in many cases, a lot of establishment connections, a lot of globalist connections, but the whole enterprise of polling, and I can talk about this more in extra, even if it's accurate or somewhat accurate, can be very deceiving and it's very unnecessary in many ways and creates a very unfair playing field. But moving back on track here, this is Chuck Baldwin, a constitutional Christian columnist. I had the pleasure of meeting him in 2007 in Dallas at a conference. And he is quite conservative and Christian, as his CV indicates, but he's a Trump critic. He also is a Harris critic, but let's hear what he has to say about both Trump and Harris. If Trump had any sense of humanity and humility, he would simply tell the truth about Harris's track record and earn his victory with her own words and actions, the way Tulsi Gabbard defeated her in the 2020 Democratic primaries. He, Trump, would talk about her extreme woke agenda, that of Kamala Harris. And Mr. Baldwin goes on to say, in a recent column from 22 August here from Chuck Baldwin Live, this election, as are all national elections, will not be decided by Democrats or Republicans. It'll be decided by the independents, the non-aligned, the uncommitted. If Trump continues his personal insulting attacks against Harris and fails to show the American people the real Kamala Harris, the anti-law enforcement Harris, the anti-Second Amendment Harris, the anti-border protection Harris, the anti-peace Harris, the anti-religious freedom Harris, the anti-national sovereignty Harris, anti-parents' rights, the anti-freedom of speech Harris, the anti-unborn babies' right to life Harris, anti-constitutional, anti-Bill of Rights, etc. If Trump doesn't get that out about Kamala, Baldwin is saying, Trump will lose in November. Now that might seem a little harsh. Before I go on, I'll mention that I double checked that a little bit. Trump did appear yesterday, Mike, in Cochise County, Arizona, right at the border. And he has been continuing to have rallies and news appearances. Although since the shooting attempt, ambiguous though it was, he has toned down the rallies maybe just a little. Chuck Baldwin is claiming Trump is engaging in cheap shots against Kamala Harris and little else. But when I listened to Trump speak in Arizona on a video from yesterday, he did get into some substantive issues. So it's a little bit of a matter of opinion. But a little bit more about the DNC conference that wound up last night. The overriding thing is the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris in particular are trying to make so-called reproductive rights one, if not the main, at least one of the main issues. And one of the speakers Wednesday night said this: in the Jewish tradition, as indicated on this slide, translated from Hebrew, every person is an entire universe. So let's save all of these universes. And this speaker also was referring to Gazan and Israeli children being equally precious, not just Israeli. And then Cory Booker, a New Jersey U.S. Senator, who also ran for president in the Democratic primary in 2020 and also, like Kamala Harris, failed, he said this: we have LGBTQ rights, rights for people of color, reproductive rights, and we must protect Social Security. And then I make the mention here, he did not mention that the reproductive right to life of the baby itself is completely disregarded, nor did he mention how are we supposed to save Social Security without an uptick in the birth rate, which would require more young workers to exist to pay into the system. So abortion on demand would work against saving Social Security, as the Democrats claim they want to do. You have to have more people born into the workforce to help support the aging baby boomers to make the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid system work. And so we also, again, this heavy reproductive rights emphasis at the event. Reproductive rights groups, as it shows here, applaud Harris's stance on abortion. This is a lady named Minnie Tamaraju, president of the pro-choice nonprofit Reproductive Freedom for All. She said, kind of strangely, when abortion is on the ballot, we win. A rather Orwellian comment, I might add. She said that Wednesday at the DNC convention. And moving on from there, I'll continue to highlight the way and the manner in which they discussed abortion on demand, aka reproductive rights, a softer euphemism there. This is Cecile Richards, the infamous former president of Planned Parenthood. She also served on the Ford Foundation, I might add. She said this at the convention, even more Orwellian: one day our children and grandchildren may ask us when it was all on the line, what did you do? She asked. And the only acceptable answer is everything we could. In other words, as if protecting the abortion industry is a high moral thing, is something at a high moral level. And then there are lots of claims by NPR and at the Democratic National Convention about the gun violence being the leading killer of children. And I looked into this right after the event last night, and NPR in March of 2024 published this: despite bans in some states, more than 1 million abortions just in the US alone were provided in 2023. And then I inserted this note at the bottom, Mike: a mere 1,663 children, almost 1,700 children and adolescents both, died from U.S. gun violence in 2023, the source being the Association of Healthcare Journalists. So all these grandiose claims that the leading cause of death of children is gun violence is obviously shown to be false, that the actual leading source of death of children is abortion itself. And it's important to point that out. They also noted on NPR that it was assumed that the leading source of deaths among children was gun violence as of 2020, and that surpassed car accidents for the first time. but these are just some of the misdirections and misleading things that are that have been shared at the Democratic National Convention. And we'll go ahead from there and wind this up.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Right.
Yeah, I believe that's it. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, it is. Debbie, over to you. And we've got an and finally for everyone.
Well, if the world can't get any crazier, I don't personally use avatars, but I know a lot of people do. But if you want to move on from your avatar, design your own clone. Have a look at this little piece of film.
The promise of generative AI is shaking up the technology world and the markets. Industry giants set to invest an estimated $1 trillion into artificial intelligence over the coming years. One company at the forefront of it all is Delphi, with the launch of their groundbreaking AI clones. The company offering users the ability to create digital versions of themselves, from company CEOs to YouTubers and celebrities, that can help manage the workload, from answering questions to sitting in on Zoom calls via a clone. Joining me now is the co-founder of Delphi, Dara Lajevardian, and making his first ever television appearance is Dara's AI clone. Dara, thank you for joining us. Dara's clone, thank you for joining us. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thank you for having me.
And I want to start by asking your clone a couple of questions, none of which have been sent to you in advance or your company before now. To Dara's clones, let me ask you what you believe the purpose or the uses of having a clone really is for.
The purpose of having a clone is to scale your unique way of thinking and interacting. It allows you to share your knowledge, experiences, and personality with others in a personalized way. This can be incredibly valuable for mentoring, teaching, or even just sharing your insights with a broader audience. What aspect of cloning interests you the most?
That's pathetic, Debbie. I'm deeply unimpressed with that clone, but I'll just make the point that you and I have been talking about digital twins for many years now, and of course, IBM, one of the big organizations behind that idea. This is the whole idea of creating an entire digital duplicate of everything in a society, with the idea of being able to effectively forecast how populations will behave and so on. It's just one of the aspects of it.
It's prediction. Again, we're going for prediction. We'll talk more about it in Extra, because I can show you a bit of a vision of 2040 as well. So if you're a signed up member, look forward to Extra in a bit.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody that joined us today. We will be back, as Debbie said, in a couple of minutes for Extra. Otherwise, everybody have a great weekend as best you can, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Bye-bye.